Hello friends and welcome to Noble Literature classes. This is going to be our last lecture in the series on objective criticism or the early 20th century criticism. Up till now we have done the objective criticism of Matthew Arnold and T.S. Eliot. Then we moved on to the new criticism of the first generation of new critics like I.A. Richards and J.C. Ransom. And then in the last lecture we did fallacies and heresies of W.K. Wimsatt and Cleanth Brooks, which were the second generation of new critics. So in this lecture we will see how Northrop Frye discovered a hidden literary universe in the buried theories of Saint Paul and the Italian Dante Alighieri. So first we shall define the early Christian concept of typology as it was developed in the epistles or letters of Saint Paul to his patrons, and then secondly we shall discuss how Dante and the medieval church they expanded this Pauline typology onto 4 levels of meaning. And finally we shall turn to the archetypal theories of Northrop Frye, which he discussed in this famous work Anatomy of Criticism 1957. So what is typology? If you look in the dictionary, it means the study of various types and symbols of the Bible. What it means is that people study the various types of Bible that exist today, like the King James version of the Bible, or the New King James version of the Bible, or the Old Testament of the Bible, or the New Testament Bible, or the Hebrew Bible, or the Jewish Bible. There are different kinds of Bible. We can make a video on that later. But to study all of them and analyzing the symbols used in those Bibles and trying to find similarities or differences or like any relation between those Bibles. So that thing is known as typology. So Saint Paul was the first person to start this approach of typology in the 1st century AD when he gave this New Testament. So according to typological reading of Bible, many of the people or events and symbols do not achieve their full meaning until they are viewed under the life cycle of Jesus Christ. So in this Pauline typology, which was like Saint Paul's method of typology, he compares the Joshua of the Jews with the Jesus of Christians. He says that Joshua is a type of Jesus, just like Joshua led the children of Israel over that river Jordan and into that promised land which we call as Jerusalem today. Similarly, Jesus who leads the church through the river of death into the promised land of heaven. And he also compares this sacrifice of Isaac by his father Abraham. He says that just like Abraham sacrificed his son Isaac for the good of people, similarly Jesus also sacrificed himself for the betterment of society. So therefore sacrifice of Isaac is a type of crucifixion of Jesus. We can also find these types by comparing our own culture and the culture of Western civilization. For example, the Western god of thunder, Zeus, is a type of our god Indra. Both are the kings of all the gods. And there are so many several similarities or types which we can find out. So this is what we mean by typology or the Pauline typology. They find similarities and these similarities indicate some hidden meaning in our textures. So typology is not just a study of Bible. Like whenever a critic is trying to discover hidden similarities or patterns in a work of art, he is doing a kind of typology. So therefore, a typological theory of poetry believes that great poetry is not haphazard or random in structure, but it is both meaningful and purposeful. Now, many church fathers or these scholars of those times, especially like Saint Thomas Aquinas, they studied this Pauline typology, and by the time we reach the medieval era of Christianity, every verse of scripture was believed to work on 4 separate levels of meaning. These levels are known as literal or the historical meaning, then the allegorical or the typological meaning, then the tropological or the moral meaning of something, and finally the anagogical or the spiritual interpretation of something with allusions to the afterlife of divinity. Now we can take the example of Israel coming out of Egypt. Dante also talks about this in his verse epistles. he says that Israel coming out of Egypt is actually a historical event. And if you look at the literal or the historical meaning, it simply means or refers to the Exodus. If you look at the allegorical or the typological meaning, it means that Jesus is freeing people from their sins. If you look at the tropological or the moral meaning, it means the conversion of soul from its bondage to sin to the new freedom that they have found in Jesus Christ. And the final meaning, which is the anagogical or the spiritual meaning, it simply means that the soul will leave our slavic body and enter the true promised land of heaven. But Dante says that these meanings, they don't happen in a chronological order, and also they are not just four in number. For Dante Alighieri, meaning is polysemous. Polysemous means the coexistence of many possible meanings for any word. So we can take an example of piano over here. Like in every chord of a piano, we can spot the individual keystrokes also, which are getting pressed simultaneously. So similarly, a poem also has different meanings acting simultaneously. Now, if you remember the previous lecture, which is Brooks' pattern of resolved stresses, there also we can see how these new critics are talking about that ironic balance of these internal tensions between each other. So these tensions are nothing but different meanings which are signified by a piece of art. So therefore we can say that there are similarities between the new critical methods, this typology, or these four levels of meaning. Now let us come to the last critic in our unit on objective criticism. Well, Northrop Frye was a Canadian literary critic and theorist, lived from 1912 to 1991, and he is considered one of the most influential critics of the 20th century. I am saying it because he was the one who came up with this archetypal theory, which is considered as the final point of the new critics. Now, he was the editor of his college literary journal known as Acta Victoriana, and he is also famous for this concept of garrison mentality. While studying the Canadian literature, he came up with this concept to define how the Canadian writers are writing, what is the attitude that they have while writing literature. So that is what garrison mentality is all about. Margaret Atwood was very much influenced by this concept, and she is a very famous writer. So he did not only influence Margaret Atwood, he also influenced Harold Bloom, Frederick Jameson, etc., and like so many people. He was the member of the Baudelaire Club, and he is famous for his studies on William Blake. And he was also the minister of the Canadian Church, if you want to know. Like, he was a very faithful religious man. So now let us see his main achievement, which was the anatomy of criticism, and especially the archetypal theory of criticism which he gave. So in this theory, he combines the objective approach of new critics with the polysemous approach of typology. And he borrows his ideas from almost every theorist which we have mentioned in these lectures or this entire series, especially the systematic thinkers like Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, Coleridge, all those people. And he even includes the myth studies of William Blake, Carl Jung, Fraser, etc. But in order to not deviate from our path of new criticism, we'll skip all those theories and we'll just focus on the archetypal theory of Northrop Frye. So just like the other new critics, Frye wants to keep his focus on the object. He says that when studying literature, we can either take the outward or the centrifugal approach, which draws us away from the poetic object towards the history, biography, etc., or we can take the centripetal or the inward approach, which draws us into the poem, and then we deal with all these literary devices, etc. So Frye goes with the centripetal approach into the heart of the poem, just like all the new critics. And he says that the poem does not have a separate meaning or a separate paraphrasable core apart from itself. That is, its meaning is completely inward and verbal. And he defines a poem as a literary verbal structure. Now, this verbal does not mean something which we relate to speaking. This verbal is derived from verb, from the grammar which we use, the verbs, and it means something in action, like something which is not fixed. Now, in order to understand his archetypal theory, First of all, we must know what are archetypes. In the language of Northrop Frye, archetypes are these symbols which connect one poem with another poem in order to integrate our literary experience, our complete literary experience. Now, he says that these archetypes are associative clusters and they can be either words or images or rituals, and they carry a wealth of connotative meanings and emotions. This connotative meaning means that there are more than one meanings possible. Now, when you see somebody wearing a turban, you can assume that that man has some responsibility and some respect in the society. And similarly, when you see an old magician in a fairy tale or some other magical movie, you think that that old magician, he is an archetype of some wise person who is going to lead the main character on their journey. Similarly, a dragon in those same kind of movies, they can be archetypes of great power which needs to be feared and controlled also. So these are the archetypes which represent something more than just their own descriptive self. So Northrop Frye agrees with the new critics that we don't have to look outside to study a poem, that we need to look inside. But then he constructs a more wider or a more archetypal view of poetry, in which he places each poem at the center of a web of meanings. So he says that every poem has these different kinds of meanings which a critic can come to. For example, a moral critic will find the moral meaning, a historical critic will find the historical essence in that poem. So Frye says that these archetypes that we discussed ago, they don't only help us discover all these kinds of meanings in a poem, but they also link one poem with another poem. For example, if you see a dragon in some movie, you will definitely relate that dragon to some other movie. Therefore, one movie gets related to another one because of these archetypes. Therefore, although these new critics isolate the poems from external world, but they insist us to study them as part of all great poetry. Now, you can notice here that unlike all the previous new critics, Frye has said that the canon also, it is just a part now. It is a part of the total human imitation of nature that we now call civilization. So he partially rejects the notion of Cleanth Brooks and redefines the poem, that a poem is not a universe of its own. In fact, it is just a single planet in the self-contained universe of literature, in which each planet is connected to each other with all these archetypes. And the goal of the archetypal critic is to find the center of this literary universe. So therefore, the archetypal critic, in a flash of insight, realizes that the forces of nature or history do not contain the literal meaning. In fact, they are themselves contained in one of the visions of one of the poets who once lived on this earth. So friends, I think it should be enough for you to understand the concept of these objective criticism and the new criticism. And in the next lecture, we will start with our final unit on modernist and postmodernist thinkers. If you have any question, any doubt, or if you think there was any mistake in this lecture, please feel free to write it in the comments down below. If you like this video, give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. Thank you and have a very nice day.